Did Albert Einstein stall progress and lead science down the wrong path? Everyone's heard of the theory of relativity. It was cooked up by Albert Einstein, a theoretical physicist, back in the early 20th century. That famous formula, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, is something even high school kids can rattle off today. It's simple yet catchy. Energy depends on mass and how fast light moves. Modern science loves to hype it up, saying stuff like, discovering that time is relative was a game changer for how we see the universe. It's one of the biggest wins for human brain power over old, stubborn ideas. But what if all this is just a shiny cover-up? What if it's hiding a global plot that held back the progress of our civilization? Let's dig into this step by step. I'm going to break it down for you in plain English, like we're just chatting over coffee. I'll toss in some history, my own take, and a bit of digging from the web to stretch this out into a big, meaty article aiming for about 15,000 words. We'll swap all those numbers for words too, just to keep it smooth. So, why might Einstein have thrown a wrench in the works and sent science off course? Buckle up, this is gonna be a ride. Science on the brink. What was happening before Einstein? To get why relativity might have been a roadblock, we need to rewind to the late 19th century. Back then, scientists all over the world were obsessed with cracking a mystery. How does light travel? Today, we know light moves as waves through empty space. But folks back then figured it needed something to travel through, like how sound needs air. They called this invisible something the ether, a kind of cosmic soup filling the universe. If the ether was real, they thought, the speed of light should change depending on how fast you're moving through it. This wasn't just a wild guess, it was a big deal. Proving the ether existed could have opened the door to mind-blowing tech. Imagine pulling energy straight out of thin air, sending it anywhere without wires, and giving it away practically for free. That's the kind of future scientists were sniffing around for back then. The world was teetering on the edge of a breakthrough that could have flipped everything: industry, daily life, you name it. Enter Nikola Tesla, the Serbian inventor who became a legend. You've probably heard his name. He's the guy tied to wild ideas about wireless electricity. Tesla was all in on the ether. He believed it was real and built his inventions around it. Stories say he could light bulbs from miles away or whip up massive electrical sparks by tapping into the air. Some of his experiments still stump modern researchers, even with all our fancy gear. Why? Maybe because he was onto something with the ether, something we've since lost track of. Now, Tesla wasn't perfect. Some folks reckon he borrowed heavily from lesser-known geniuses who didn't get the spotlight. Fair enough, he wasn't a saint. But he's the one who got famous, pushing the idea that free energy for everyone was possible. No coal mines, no oil rigs, no pricey gas stations, just power for all, like it's no big deal. So why didn't it happen? The dark side. Who stood to lose? Picture this, a world where energy's free. Cars don't need gas, homes light up without bills, factories hum along without coal or oil. Sounds like paradise for regular folks, right? But for the big shots raking in cash from energy, it's a nightmare. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the world was already carved up by heavy hitters. Oil, coal, and gas were the lifeblood of the economy. Guys like John D. Rockefeller, who built an empire on oil, or Henry Ford, whose cars guzzled gas, were calling the shots. Bankers like J.P. Morgan backed them up, keeping the money flowing. These weren't just businessmen, they were power brokers. Free energy? That'd tank their fortunes and clout overnight. History backs this up. Oil was black gold back then. By the early 20th century, Rockefeller's Standard Oil controlled over 90% of the U.S. oil market, according to historians. That's not just business, that's domination. Now imagine someone like Tesla showing up with a way to ditch oil for good. For Rockefeller, Ford, Morgan, and their buddies, that's game over. Tesla's ether-based ideas were a threat. His projects could have shredded the system they'd built. So what did they do? They hit back. First, they cut off Tesla's cash. Banks that once funded him slammed the door. Governments in Europe, where he pitched his stuff, said no thanks. His ideas got labeled as crazy or impractical. Then it got weirder. Other scientists chasing the ether started hitting walls too. Their work didn't get published, funding dried up, and some even died under sketchy circumstances. Coincidence? Maybe. But it's fishy. Shutting down the ether. How'd they pull it off? The ether theory didn't go down without a fight. It had big fans, not just lone wolves like Tesla, but top minds everywhere. Take the Michelson-Morley experiment from the late 19th century. It was supposed to prove the ether existed, but the results were murky. Still, plenty of scientists kept the faith and pushed ahead. The anti-ether crew started small. They had insiders in patent offices, places where inventors register their ideas. These folks stalled paperwork, leaked secrets to rivals, or lost key files. It let the big players control what saw daylight and what got buried. But that was just a band-aid. The ether kept popping up, with scientists worldwide digging into it. So, the powers that be cooked up a bolder move. They needed a new theory, one that had killed the ether dead and steer science somewhere else. It had to sound legit, no questions asked. Cue Albert Einstein. Einstein, accidental star or pawn in the game. Albert Einstein was a nobody in the early 20th century. Just a regular guy clocking in at a patent office in Switzerland. No fame, no big discoveries. Then, out of nowhere, in 1905, he drops his special theory of relativity. It says there's no ether, time and space bend based on how fast you're moving. Crazy, right? Even crazier, it took off like wildfire. Newspapers, magazines, universities all hyping it as the next big thing. Here's the weird part. Tons of top scientists back then hated it. They thought it was half-baked, shaky, and way too out there. But their protests got drowned out. Relativity hit every language, landed in textbooks, and anyone who wouldn't play ball got the boot. Professors defending the ether lost jobs, labs, and reputations. It was like a full-on blitz. How does a random patent clerk get that kind of push? Some folks figure the big money guys, Rockefeller, Morgan, and crew were behind it. They needed someone to spin a theory that had derailed the ether and free energy talk. Was Einstein in on it, or just a lucky pick? We'll never know for sure. But his timing was perfect, some say. Dmitri Mendeleev, the forgotten hero, there's another twist not many talk about. In 1904, Dmitri Mendeleev, the Russian genius behind the periodic table, wrote a letter to Simon Newcomb, an American astronomer. Mendeleev was big on the ether too. He said he was working on a paper to prove it existed, and even slotted it into his table as newtonium, a superlight element. He planned to unveil this updated table in late 1905. It could have sealed the deal on the ether and fast-tracked free energy tech. Then, bam, Einstein's relativity drops right before Mendeleev's big moment. Suddenly, the Russian gets slammed. Critics call him sloppy. His ideas get trashed, and the pressure piles on. Mendeleev dies a couple years later, his ether work unpublished. Soon after, his table gets fixed. They yank out the ether bit like it never happened. Random timing? Sure doesn't feel like it. What did we miss out on? If the ether was real and Einstein wittingly or not threw us off track, we've lost more than we realize. Imagine free energy hitting in the early 20th century. By now, in the 21st century, we might have ditched oil and gas. Cars could fly, space trips might be like weekend getaways. Instead, we're still burning gas and shelling out big for power. Some scientists reckon relativity set us back at least 100 years. Instead of chasing ether tech, we've been stuck on Einstein's tricky equations. Cool for theory, not always great for real-world stuff. Sure, it's helped with things like GPS, but overall, it's kept us hooked on fossil fuels when we could have moved on ages ago. Still debated. What's the word today? Here's a kicker. Relativity's still controversial. In 2006, Chinese professor Li Zifeng from Yanshan University wrote a paper blasting it. He said there's zero solid proof, no real experiments back it up. Some evidence was faked, he claimed, or twisted to fit. But kicking it to the curb? Huff. After a century of hype, it's got die-hard fans who keep it alive, even if they don't fully get it or its downsides. So, are we being duped? Is relativity a trick to keep us tied to oil and gas? I'm not saying it's a slam dunk, but it's worth a hard look. History shows money and power often steer science. If free energy scared the big dogs, they'd do whatever it took to bury it. My 2 cents. What's it mean for us? Thinking about this bums me out a little. We could be in a cleaner, fairer, high-tech world right now. Instead, we're stuck in the past, burning oil and arguing over century-old theories. I'm no scientist, but I'd bet the truth somewhere in the middle. Maybe the ether's out there, and we just forgot how to find it. Or maybe Einstein was a genius who got hijacked by the wrong crowd. Either way, this story's a reminder. Science isn't just about breakthroughs, it's tangled up in politics, cash, and control. If we want to move forward, we've got to keep asking questions, even when the folks at the top don't like it.